While we sleep, the guardians of the night take to the streets, having said goodbye to those they love. Each other knowing they may never say these words again, they face the evil that we run from. They dedicate their lives to those that would hate them because they wear the badge. They wear the badge not for the glory or recognition, but because they were born to honor the thin blue line. This is the LEO First Podcast. We'll talk to the men and women in law enforcement, those that have retired, and anyone who's impacted by law enforcement. We'll peel back the curtain, and you'll get the real stories. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Every law enforcement officer has a story to tell. Get ready to hear from the men and women who put their lives on the line every day for their communities and their country. Welcome to the LEO First Podcast. Now, here's your host, Michael Laidler.
Hey everybody, it's Michael Laidler, your host of the LEO First Podcast, and today I'm at the Missouri Sheriff's Association in the Ozarks. Yeah, amazing scene, amazing water. I actually got a chance to be on the boat last night, so I'm already having a good time while I'm here. Well, as you know, I love doing in-person podcasts, and I was prepared, but I didn't know I was going to actually get a chance to do it. So I met my new friend, Will Akin, Sheriff of Clay County, and I said, you know what? Would you mind being on my podcast? I looked at his background. I kind of knew what his answer was going to be because given the group that he's associated with outside of his current agency, they're known for leadership, training, and being willing to speak and share what they have going on. So I was pretty confident that he was going to say yes. So I'm excited to be here with you, Will. And I love the opportunities to see different people in different states at different levels because we all have unique stories. And for you guys, I could tell you, I don't know what his exact story is going to be, but I already know just based on the few things we talked about before we start the podcast that you're going to be in for a treat. So whether this is your first time watching or you love watching it from YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever it might be, this is going to be one of those podcasts that I know we're going to be able to look back and reflect on and really learn from just from your life experience. So enough of me rambling, enough of me talking. I've been doing enough of that today. I'm going to turn over to Will. Tell us what you want us to know about you.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thanks for inviting me on your podcast. You had a great presentation this morning, and when we were eating lunch together, I was looking you up on LinkedIn, and I was like, oh man, this guy's legit. And so we started talking, and you were like, hey, how about doing a podcast? And I was like, absolutely. So thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate you. I never wanted to be a cop.
I've been hearing that a lot.
Never wanted to be a cop. When I was growing up, rough childhood. Father left when I was 3 years old, and we lived in terrible neighborhoods to the point where we actually became homeless for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And this was like San Jose, Santa Clara, California.
Ooh, expensive area.
Oh yeah. We were living in our station wagon. Yeah. And for me at that age, 8 to 10, it was more like camping. Because my younger brother, and the weather was kind of always nice, so we didn't have to worry about that. But at nighttime when my mom was working, she would park the car behind her business, and then my brother and I would just sleep in the back of the station wagon. And in the morning, I got to have McDonald's every morning.
You're not knowing that. Not realize that's not the natural thing to do.
No, but we didn't know any better, right? We were just, we were just kids. My mom, on the other hand, looking back. All I can think about was a single mom just trying to make it work, and she's gone now. She passed away when she was 55, very young.
Oh, young. Ooh,
yeah,
that's super young.
I'll be 50 next year, so it's kind of like context. But I love her for everything that she did. But she finally made the decision to move to Bakersfield, California, where we got to live with our grandparents, my grandparents, and our situation improved a little bit. We were still in a one-bedroom house, and there was me, my mom, my brother, and my grandparents. Correct. So we slept on the floor in the living room. So when you were telling about your story, growing up as a kid and having all your clothes in a garbage bag, the big garbage bag, it's like, oh my gosh, I totally related to that.
It's real. It's real.
Yeah. But then, the neighborhood that we grew up in, I was the minority. right? It was a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood, and just gangs everywhere. And it's just, again, that was our life.
Yeah.
It's just
reality.
what we knew. But the thing that really struck me the most was school. Man, I hated school. I hated school. And I eventually dropped out when I was 16, but it wasn't because I hated school. I thought it was more important to go to work to help support my mom and my brother than it was to get an education. Well, again, in the neighborhood that I was in, I was going nowhere. Yeah. And when I was 18 years old, I was working 3 jobs. I was delivering newspapers to about 200 houses in the morning. I'd work my regular job in the afternoon, which I was kind of like a shipping manager / fleet manager, delivering agricultural equipment to the different farms in southern and basically central California. And then at night I'd deliver pizzas. And so, this was my life, and I was just getting really tired. I was in a really bad relationship with my girlfriend at the time, and then one day, an acquaintance of mine shot a guy with a shotgun to steal his motorcycle, and that was like the straw that broke the camel's back, so to say, because I was like, "What am I doing? I'm not going anywhere." And if I was with him, if I would have been there, I would have been in just as much trouble.
Yeah, you would go wherever he was going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I made the really hard decision to leave my neighborhood, my family behind, and I joined the military. But before I was able to join the military, I went to the recruiter, and he's like, "Oh, absolutely, come on, we'll send you. When do you want to go?" I said, "Tomorrow." And he's like, "Whoa, we got to wait for at least a month. We got some paperwork to do." And as we're going through the paperwork, I was getting really excited. But then he said, "Okay, I just need a copy of your driver's license and your high school diploma." And I was like, "Well, I didn't graduate." He goes, "Well, I can't take you in." So I actually had to go back to Bakersfield Adult School to get my GED.
Yeah, just so you could be eligible for the military.
Absolutely. So I did that. I went through. I barely passed, or so I thought. I actually read it incorrectly. And if I have time, I'll go into that.
Yeah.
But I took everything back to the recruiter, and he was like, "This is all we need." He goes, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I don't care what it is. I just want to be airborne." And he said, "Oh, so you're not afraid of heights?" I go, "No, I'm definitely afraid of heights. But this is my opportunity to really challenge myself." And he laughed, and he just said, "Okay, well, let me show you a couple things." And ultimately, I picked being a parachute rigger. So I got to pack parachutes and jump all the time. So went into the Army, and I just remember thinking, the first week I was there, I was trembling when the drill sergeant was like yelling and screaming at me, and I'm just like, I grew up on the streets, like why am I shaking like this? Just a completely different environment, but it was the structure I needed because it wasn't the structure I ever had in my life. And so I ended up doing 8.5 years in the Army.
Wow, thank you, that's impressive.
Yeah, man, 4 years as a parachute rigger, and everything airborne, I did it. I was a jump master, pathfinder, jumped with the Canadians, so I have a Canadian parachutist badge. I skydived, and so I loved it. But when I was 22 years old, I, with about 100 jumps under my belt, I was like, man, my body hurts.
Yeah, jumping that many times in any fashion will definitely take you out quickly.
Yes. So I oddly enough, I'm going to back up just a little bit, because when there were 9 of us that got to my first duty station. We went through training together, and we all went to the same place. We got together and we were talking about how we were going to promote and fast track through the ranks and stuff like that. And I was like, heck yeah, man. And they were talking about military training, and then they started talking about colleges. And I was like, what? I have to go to school to get promoted? Well, I already said I hated school.
Yeah. Like I said, high school, you just went back just to get into the military.
Yes. So I was the only one out of 9 of us to graduate with my associate's degree, which allowed me to become eligible to put my flight packet in.
Oh,
and so I did.
So one led to the other.
Yes. And so got picked up for flight school, and I ended up being a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter pilot.
Oh, just because you decided to go, well, you were kind of talked to going back to school.
Yeah.
And the other ones, although they talked about it, they didn't really execute it.
No. And let's face it, going back to school is not an easy thing to do.
It's not.
And especially for someone who hated school as much as I did. And I'll admit, English was my worst topic. I hated English. I failed every English class in high school. My kid's mom, my first marriage, she wrote all of my papers in English when working on my associates. Look, I admit, that wasn't my strong suit. But
you outsourced it. You outsourced it.
Absolutely. But then when I was 26 years old, I was diagnosed with adult onset asthma, and they permanently grounded me and told me to find a new job.
Yeah, they're serious about the asthma in the military. I've learned, I've been told by many people, you have any level of asthma throughout your lifetime or you develop it, they don't even take the chance.
Nope. So I was devastated. I asked the flight doc, I was like, hey, what does this mean for my career? And he's like, you don't have one anymore. And I was just like, well, what am I going to do? And so I started looking for jobs, and this is well before the military, or at least the Army, had the separation track where they help you find a job and stuff like that. It was kind of like the beginning phases of that. So they were just like, yeah, we're going to hold a job fair. Just come over here, check it out, see if you like any of these people. And I'm just like, okay. Well, the one group that I connected with the most at that job fair was Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department in North Carolina.
I was like, let's see, California, Missouri. I was like, I don't know where Charlotte's at, but I was like, I feel like it's over somewhere else.
As a side note, I've moved 38 times in 48 years, lived in 10 states and 3 countries.
That's not even a small side. Like how do you start off with this, a side note? No, that is a lot of moving.
I know.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. Okay, even though I connected with Charlotte-Mecklenburg, I never dreamed of being a cop. In the neighborhoods that I grew up in, there was no community policing.
Yeah,
when the cops showed up, you ran, whether you were doing something right or not. I mean, it was just you ran because there was no community-oriented policing. There was no positive relationships there. And so now I have 2 kids, and I have my own family, and I'm like, I have to have a job. Well, going into law enforcement made the most sense because it was still quasi-militaristic.
Oh, extremely.
And I did very well in my military career, and I'm like, this makes the most sense. Well, Charlotte-Mecklenburg, I didn't have any family over there, so I was like exploring my options. Well, I had an uncle that lived in Phoenix, Arizona. And so ultimately, I applied to Phoenix PD, and they hired me.
Okay.
And so now...
At the age of 26 or 27 by now?
27 now.
You're 27, okay, because
Yes.
you started applying after 26 after hearing about, okay.
Yeah. So went to the Arizona Law Enforcement Academy in April of 2003, and I tell you what, it wasn't my decision in the beginning, but I am so glad it happened the way it did. And I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason.
Absolutely, yeah.
I can look back now on my short lifespan, and I know that things happen for a reason, and it wasn't me being in control.
Correct.
Because that first year, half my unit went to Afghanistan, the other half Iraq, and to support aviation support, and I lost 5 friends. Well, if I was a part of that deployment group, how do I know that wouldn't have been me?
Yeah, how do you know you wouldn't have been one of the 5? You might have been number 6.
Right.
You don't know.
Yep. So got on with the Phoenix Police Department, and that's when I started my law enforcement career. And man, let me tell you,
you've been through some stuff. You've been in law enforcement.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, so you hear people's stories, and sometimes you're like, well, you started in Phoenix, but now we're in Missouri.
Right.
And you're a sheriff in Missouri. So obviously, in 22 years?
21 years.
21 years. Yep. So in 21 years, you went from a street level patrol officer to now being over a county in an area that you're not from.
Right.
So how do we get from police officer to sheriff? These are a lot of moving pieces, because it's not like you worked for the sheriff's office here in any cap. Well, you probably did at some point, but not in the beginning.
Right.
It's not like you were in multiple areas within Missouri. You're literally coming from a whole other state, and then so where do you go from Phoenix?
So from Phoenix, after 5 years, went to South Bend, Indiana. Because at this point...
You ain't even in Missouri yet. Keep going.
Yeah.
You ain't even in Missouri yet. God.
There's 2 stops in between Phoenix and Missouri.
Okay.
But went through a divorce, had kind of a rebound marriage after that. But there's a story in that in itself, maybe for maybe another episode or something.
I like it.
But ended up in South Bend, Indiana, because I wanted to be closer to my kids. And when I was living in Phoenix, it was 2,000 miles away from my kids. And I grew up without a dad, and I swore that would never be the case for my kids. Well, I wanted to be closer, so I moved to South Bend. Now I'm 70 miles away, And crazy enough, I spent more time with them when I was 2,000 miles away than when I was 70 miles away because there was a whole lot of manipulation going on. My year in South Bend was not a good one, let's just say.
Fair enough.
But
it's reality, though.
It's reality. Yeah. And I wish divorce on no one because that was very difficult, especially for the kids, you know. But it wasn't just that. The South Bend Police Department was a hot mess. And, you know, I grew up in Southern California. I have Mexicans in my family. I have Filipinos in my family.
Yeah. Diversity.
Absolutely, right? The melting pot of society, you know. I go to South Bend, and I tell you what, the racism.
Yeah.
They were dropping the N-word in briefing like it was a regular part of their vocabulary.
So, all right, so I
do the math.
No, I'm going to do the math because I'm a very realistic person. I transparent. I think I've told you guys that throughout the presentation. I tell people all the time. So, we're not talking about the 60s. We're not talking about the 70s. We're not talking about the 80s. We're not even talking about the 90s. We're talking about late 2000s.
2008.
2008, because once again, we track keeping up with your career. You started in 2003 for Phoenix. Now 5 years later, now you're in South Bend. So, like you said, and some people, you know, it's weird how sometimes we think that things like racism just has gone away. And obviously we're 17 years removed from that time, or 16 years if my math is right. But regardless, I mean, in our lifetimes, you're like you said, you're hearing it. You're just like, guys, this is like 2008. Like, this ain't the 60s.
I struggled with it.
Yeah, like, but people don't think people don't believe it was even a reality. They would never say, well, I'm gonna look at Will Akin and say, he's been around racism because he's only going on 50. But they don't know. People don't know that it's just within the last 20 years you actually went through it.
Yeah.
And not obviously it was directed towards you, but that obviously in the environment they're like, oh, we can speak freely, but it's reality. So cool. Sorry, you throw me. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Now I do have to throw in kind of like a caveat, not a caveat, but kind of like in all fairness, South Bend is in a much better place today. I'm still connected with guys who started it relatively at the same time I did, and now they're command staff, and the stuff they post on social media, I'm just like, yes.
Yeah.
They finally have gotten to a point where it's not like it was 14 years ago.
Yeah. But sometimes you walk into that.
Oh, yeah.
You don't know what you're walking into. I mean, it ain't like they advertise it on the, like, hey, come to South Bend, we're going to use the N-word. Like, you know, I haven't seen anything like that.
Oh, man. So I decided to go to a much better place. That was Kabul, Afghanistan.
That was good. That was good.
No, all jokes aside, I stepped off the airplane and I looked at the mountains right there where Kabul International Airport's at, and it looked just like Phoenix.
That's interesting.
I've
never been to Afghanistan, but I've been to Phoenix.
Oh man, I'm just like, wow, this it felt like home.
Yeah.
Until that night, and reality struck in the form of rockets. Right?
Yeah. That's definitely not Phoenix. That's definitely not Phoenix. So
definitely not.
There's a difference. That is probably the biggest difference.
That's the one thing Phoenix didn't have.
Right. Yeah. No rockets. No rockets here. Thank you.
So I spent 3 years in Afghanistan. I was a contractor. I was a police advisor. And that was a very eye-opening experience. Now, this time of my life, I've just gotten divorced a second time. And I was not in a good headspace. We briefly touched on it before we started the podcast, but you know, I was sitting on my couch in Arizona looking at my firearm, going, do I put it in my mouth or to the side of my head?
It's
and
real.
I was like, and because I was just going through a lot in my life, divorce and the constant trauma from the job, and I was just like, I was at my tipping point. Well, I couldn't do it because of my kids, right? So it just knocked it out of my mind. I was like, nope, I can't do this because I felt like they would have thought I was a coward, right? Because they didn't understand what I was going through. So ultimately, my reason to go to Afghanistan was to never come home.
Because you put yourself in an area that is likely that you may
High
not come
risk,
back. Yeah,
high risk.
Extremely high risk. If people don't understand what Afghanistan is, maybe we have a younger viewer on. Maybe they're like, I don't know. Just go look it up. And the rates are definitely not as there's a little bit of risk averse there. To say the least. Yes.
I was the one who quickly got a reputation that no matter what the threat analysis was, that will be your guy to go out on that mission, right? Because if I died over there, my kids would have thought I was a hero. I was serving my country, you know. Now I'm really glad that I'm still here today.
I am
able
too,
to do this podcast with you. But it was interesting because the first 7 months I was working with Afghan police chiefs, trying to help them learn how to be police officers, and we did everything from logistics to operations to finances, but that was a waste of time. It was literally the warlord of that district wearing a different uniform because of the occupation of the time. So I actually went from that contract to a different contract for the Family Response Unit. That was awesome.
Still in Afghanistan?
Still in Afghanistan, because I got to work with investigators who were educated, who could speak English, and loved their country. So I helped them work crimes against women and children, gender rights violations, and human rights violations. Got to work with all of our international partners and just kind of like spotlight the importance of respecting women. Because they're not very well respected over there. So that was frustrating too. It was really frustrating because of the things that was brought to our attention that we had no authority over.
Correct. You just had to sit there and
all we could do is just help them because we didn't have executive authority. So we just did the best we could. Well, another opportunity came up, and I was selected to go into an embedded program where I was completely embedded with an Army unit. And for about 8 months of that time of my life, I can't talk about, it's not because we were like super secret squirrel, but I don't want to divulge something that we weren't supposed to because it was still the military's responsibility.
Absolutely.
And a lot of trauma from that. And so I came back to the States and I said, I'm done. Now I'm talking with my third wife.
Correct.
Right? At this point, we got married, but it was a very different situation. Awesome story, but again, perhaps another episode. Came back to unwind and reset. So I got a job at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. It's a research hospital for kids. I saw more dead kids there than I did anywhere else in my life.
Because obviously, if you're a researcher, you got to research. You got to have the person there, or that, whatever you want to call it, in that situation. Like you can't, if you're gonna do the research, it has to be in that environment.
Amazing research hospital. I mean, I loved the staff. Everything from the Ronald McDonald House for the family members all the way to the staff who were there with the kids. The kids always had great attitudes. They were always positive,
always happy to
despite what they were going through. So that part was a positive experience. But one day I came back home and my wife said, "You need to go back." And I was like, okay, I just worked like a 10-hour shift. I was like, did I forget to do the dishes? Like, what did I do to upset you? And she's like, no, you need to go back to Afghanistan. And I was like, okay, did I piss you off?
What kind of insurance do you want?
Well, she goes, no. She goes, I see you. She goes, and I appreciate everything you're doing for us, the family. She goes, but I see you coming home from this job, and I look at you like Paul Blart, the mall cop. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're like on a roll,
This was in part 1 versus part 2, This was the first series. This was the first movie by him.
And she goes, with all of your background and experience and stuff like that, she goes, you need to go back to Afghanistan. She goes, that's where you thrive. And I was like, well, I said 3 days ago, my former boss called me and said, you need to come back. And she goes, go. So long story short, went back, and in my last contract in Afghanistan, I did all the convoy security operations, did some executive protection. So whenever some people who thought they were VIPs would come in, we'd have to go and take care of them and stuff like that.
Fair enough,
Then our company went through a RIF. And during that year, we knew the RIF was coming. I didn't end up on the RIF. In fact, I was kind of doing really well with the company, and I'm sure I would have grown with the company. But my partner in the Family Response Unit was now the former sheriff of Clay County, Missouri.
Okay.
So he that year he said, hey, he goes, I'm going to run for sheriff. And he goes, and if I win, I want you to come out work with me. Well, my response simply was, effing Missouri? Fill in the blank, right? I was like, are you kidding me? And all the places I've ever lived, like Missouri has never been on my list of places to go. And he's like, no, I'm serious. And I was like, nah, man, I'm good. Well, he worked on me. He kept working on me.
You just got to beat away at that shield just every day.
And so I finally told him, I was like, look, if you win, I'm there for you. And he's like, all right. So long story short, he won, and I moved my family from Columbus, Ohio to Liberty, Missouri.
How far is that between the two?
She's like 700 miles, I think.
That's still, roughly.
Still, yeah. But we had no one there except for Paul.
Yeah.
And so that was 11 and a half years ago. So that was December 1st of 2012. So I've been with the sheriff's office for 11 and a half years, but I never intended to run for sheriff. I told Paul, I said, let me know when you're done so I can get my resume in order and I can go off and be a police chief somewhere.
Correct, absolutely.
And he was like, okay, well.
And what did he bring you in as?
A lieutenant.
Lieutenant, okay.
Yeah, because there were 3 things that I had to have, and I told him what my 3 things were, and one of them is I have to make X amount of dollars.
Yeah, to make it work.
Because I was taking a massive pay cut to go leave country to come back, and he was able to meet that, but it was in the form of a lieutenant. I wanted to spend as much time with my family as I wanted to, and he knew my background and he understood the family dynamics, and he was like, done. And I said, and I want to go to the FBI National Academy. And he goes, I'll support you. He said, but you're going to have to do the work.
Yeah.
Because it was a long application process and
correct.
stuff like that. And man, he came through. He supported me. I went to the FBI National Academy in 2016 as a captain. And man, my experience with the Clay County Sheriff's Office was awesome. But as you mentioned earlier, alluded to, I was an outsider. And I was an outsider coming in as a lieutenant.
Yeah.
Man, so the first 2 years was pretty rough. Yeah. And about the second year, people were like, "Oh man, you know what? This Will guy, he's actually kind of cool."
We thought he was a little soft. No, we can't beat him. We can't beat him on this one.
Right. So Paul eventually said, "Hey," he goes, "I just want to let you know I'm retiring." He goes, "This is my last term," and he still had 3 years left. And I was just like, "Okay, I'll get my resume together." And he goes, "No. He goes, "You need to reconsider." And I was like, "Reconsider what?" And he goes, "You need to run for sheriff," because so I was actually the spokesperson for the sheriff's office the 8 years leading up to me becoming sheriff.
So that's like PIO,
public relations, media relations, community-oriented policing, and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And every natural disaster, man-made disaster, or incident that we were in, I was front and center, right? So the community knew who I was.
That's, if people don't know, as a sheriff, that's how you get your job. You
That's
get elected by the people.
Yes.
It's not like a chief of police where you're selected by the city manager or the board of directors or whatever that group is. Like as a sheriff, like you're voted in.
Right.
It's okay.
Yeah. So it was. I said, "Hey, look, I have to go talk with my wife. I have to get permission."
Fair enough.
Look, I've been married 3 times.
Yeah, I was like, you're learning.
I learned, what I can get away with and where I need to go. Okay, I need to bring my life partner into this, conversation.
Yeah, there's no more just winging.
No, and so I approached my wife about it, and she was just like, "Are you crazy?" Because we were going through a very turbulent time between the commissioners at the time and the sheriff's office, and she's like, "I don't want nothing to do with that. I don't want anything to do with that." And I was just like, "Yeah, but." Like, it's not that I want to be sheriff, but if he retires, then who's the next sheriff going? Who's the next sheriff?
I'm gonna have a boss somewhere,
right?
Yeah,
well, I would, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Like you would have it. Like you have to think like, hey, if I don't get a chief of police or if I don't get another job somewhere else, whoever comes in, they're gonna be my boss. So,
yeah, yes. And so we fought for about 6 months. And she finally gave me permission. She said,
which is good.
"If you're going to do this, you better do it to win." And I was like, "There's no other way." And so I spent 2 years running for sheriff. And November of 2020, the people decided that I was the best candidate for it, and they elected me. And I took over January 1st of 2021.
Wow, that's a lot of different moving pieces that you went through. I mean, I don't know. I can't remember. You said 30 or 38 moves in 48 years.
Yeah.
Whatever you said, it started with a 3. It didn't start and end with 1 3. It was double. It was double digits of 3. So, with that, one of the things that I want to get back to, I'm gonna go back to your Afghanistan days, and there was that 3-year window when you were gone. You were over there. How did that impact your family, especially your boys?
Oh man, I carried so much guilt. So much guilt, and the reason for it is because I was on the other side of the planet.
Yeah,
right?
no, literally, that's not even 2,000 miles.
Oh,
That's
gosh.
what, I don't know, 15,000, 7,000.
Yeah,
that's a lot of miles.
Yeah, but years later, my sons are 19, 24, and 28. The only one that has a birthday left is my 24-year-old. He'll be 25. But We all had them at home. We had all of them at home. And I'm very animated at home, super silly and stuff like that, because I have to be serious all the time, you know, at work. And I told them, I said, guys, I just want to apologize to you. And they were like, for what? Like, what's the punchline here? And I was like, no, I said, I've missed out on so many things in your life as teenagers. Like, I wasn't there for you. And my oldest son, he turns around and he looks at me and he goes, Dad, are you kidding me? He goes, even though you were on the other side of the world, you still knew who our teachers' names were, what our teachers' names were. And it wasn't until that moment where he said that where I was like, oh, I might not have been present physically, but I was still present in their lives.
Correct.
And you know, at that time we had Skype, because FaceTime wasn't.
Skype was, I don't even know what happened to Skype anymore, but Skype was definitely the pioneer of video messaging.
Yes, and so I would say, I mean, it wasn't every night, but I tried to talk with them as much as I could. So I was still present in their lives. I just wasn't present physically, and you know, it's just what it was. When I was over there for the family. Now, my wife today, if I said, hey, babe, I'm going to go back to Afghanistan, she'll be like, I'm going to lock you to the pipe in the bedroom.
So too many. You ain't doing it no more,
I mean, I think the kids would be involved in doing that too. Yeah. So, so a very different time. But that also allowed me, so I met my wife online, and we just celebrated 13 years, our 13th anniversary.
Amazing.
Yeah. We've been together for 14 years. But we met online, and so we were able to build a relationship on a platform of communication. Because in the 2 years that we were together at first, we kind of added it up, and it was like 3.5 months total combined time that we were able to spend together. And so the rest of the time, was emails and letters, and even though. I hate writing, right?
Hey, but that's
check this out. So I did that because I was courting her, and now I mean she's my best friend, like hands down. But just kind of like, in addition to that, in Afghanistan I went back to school, and I finished my bachelor's degree in criminal justice.
Okay.
So my associate's was in behavioral science. My bachelor's is in criminal justice, and that's when I was like, man, school's kind of easy. Even the writing was easy.
It's not that bad as I thought it was going to be.
I think mostly it was because now I wanted to do it, as opposed to me having to do it. And that was just a very different mindset. And I actually went on straight into my master's program and got an MBA with a concentration in management. And I actually finished that while I was at the sheriff's office.
Nice.
Well, I was done after that, man. I was like, school, I am done.
I'm already getting things I don't need right now, because people don't know in law enforcement. You really don't need, like, it's not a necessity to get to certain levels with the degree. Like, you don't have to be a sheriff, you don't have to have a master's, you don't have to have a bachelor's, but for your own knowledge base and helping those around you and just yourself, it's good to get that education.
Gosh, absolutely. It makes you more of a holistic person.
Yes.
I'm not saying that being book smart doesn't get you somewhere, but it proves a lot of things. Like you can commit to something.
Correct.
But it also expands your horizons, because a lot of people, they don't have the opportunity to leave their neighborhoods, or where they grew up from, or if they did, it's kind of like a vacation. Yeah. Man, I've been all over the place.
You have been,
and my perception on things are just very different because of my world experience. Yeah. But long story short, I ended up teaching at a university, and it was funny because I kept looking at my colleagues, not my peers, because they were all doctors, and I was like, how in the world did they become a doctor? Because something's missing, right? That's brilliant people, but when it came to common sense, I'm like, oh, street smarts. There's no street smarts. And I was like, if they can do it, I can do it. So I actually went back to school and graduated with my doctorate in 2020.
Wow. So, you were just on a roll.
You
went from not even graduating high school, now you go to adult school. You're in the military thinking, you know what, I'm just gonna get an associate's, just because this is what we talked about. And plus you need it for the flight school. Now you done jumped in the bachelor's, like, man, this ain't too bad. Master's and now a doctorate. Wow.
Yeah. So my hashtag, GED to EDD.
I mean, but it's legit though. I mean, but you see, like with all these experiences, and obviously it's great that you have a relationship with your kids, and obviously you found the right woman for you. Yes. It took you 3 times, but hey, sometimes
third time's a charm.
Hey, third time's a charm. Hey, some people get fortunate, they get one and they're with them for 30, 40 years. Sometimes people go through 4 or 5. I mean, you don't really know, but obviously you had a lot of ups and downs. You had a lot of highs, you had a lot of lows, whether it's the marriage or your family. How did you manage and overcome some of these stressful factors in your life?
Man, definitely childhood. Because of our financial situation, I always remembered thinking to myself, I never want to be this way. When I have a family, I never want them to experience this. And I was also very competitive. I didn't have anything. So what I had, when I did have something, was because I had the drive to go and get it. And so I think that kind of like set me on the path. But it wasn't until the military. The military created structure for me. They put me in hard situations that I had to overcome. Now, granted, when you're growing up, you didn't have a choice. You just had to get through it.
Correct.
In the military, you still don't have a choice until it comes to doing extracurricular things like training and putting in for different things. And I think it just got to a point where I became comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Oof.
And I've heard that a few times from speakers, but that just resonates with me. It makes so much sense. So when I went back to school, and it wasn't because, I think it's time for me to get my education now because I want to be a police chief or a sheriff. It was more of, I hate that guy as a boss, because the only reason that he is qualified to do that is because he can talk well in front of people and he has a piece of paper up on the wall.
That's the reality. But that's, Will, that's the reality of life. But I tell people, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yes.
Like, you know what I mean? So you saw something, you're like, okay, that person's a strong communicator, and they have a sheet of paper that says they did something. So to most people, unfortunately, perception is that person knows what they're talking about. Do they really? The people around them know if they know what they're talking about, but on paper, it sounds good. So when you started to see that, continue, go ahead. You that was good.
Well, yeah. So not that I hate people, right? Because that's a very strong word. But what I did was I took those negative interactions, those negative experiences,
Correct.
and I said, you know what? When I'm in that situation, when I'm eventually in that situation, how am I going to be to make sure that I don't become that? That I can still be there for my people. And the military is very much take care of your soldiers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
so
that's pushed, yeah.
Absolutely. So I took that with me. And even when I wasn't in a quote unquote leadership position, because we're all leaders in our own right, but I was still taking care of my squad mates. I was still taking care of my precinct. I always looked at a much bigger picture of, it's not just about me, because when I go out there and I do my job, I'm representing a large group of people because of the badge, because of the shoulder patch. It wasn't even my agency. It's going to be the agency on the other side of the country. If I do something wrong, it's going to make us all look bad. So I use those experiences to just keep pushing forward. And so, I've eventually got my doctorate, and now it's still really weird for me. But now, so 25 years after I got my GED, I found it.
Yeah.
And I read it. But I understood what I was reading this time, and I passed in the top 5%.
Wow.
I did not just barely pass.
Yeah.
I had to flip it around.
You've been listening to the LEO First Podcast. Michael has been in law enforcement since 2005. He's worked for 3 law enforcement agencies in 3 different states. He's a professional speaker who travels the country teaching about leadership development and self-awareness. And he's the author of a book called Greatness Beyond the Badge: The 3 Key Principles for Self-Awareness. It's Michael's passion to bring law enforcement members' stories to the front, so you get the real and raw take. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Michael on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Michael Laidler, on Twitter at Michael A. Laidler, on Facebook at Michael Laidler Leadership. Send an email to michael@michaellaidler.com and hit the website at michaellaidler.com. See you next time on the LEO First Podcast.